ladies and gentlemen. It's a great opportunity for me to speak for such a distinguished audience, because before that I have an opportunity to short exchange with some of you, and I understand you know everything in details. And that's a challenge for me, because it's not my first speech in universities or even World Affairs Council, because we are great partners with World Affairs Council. I recognize your position. Believe me, I know that you are among the top 10. I wish you'd be top 5. I think no problem if you have such an interest for foreign affairs and security. That's new in our era, such a great interest for that, because normally if we have domestic interest in domestic issues, and it's traditionally it's also a normal thing for America, not for Ukraine, because Ukrainians every time very interested in everything. Not this happen, it's the next door, you know, it's the next apartments. Most Ukrainians knows everything about soccer, about foreign policy and security, so it's a normal thing. And especially politicians, they understand everything and can give you any advice, the piece of advice or even many advices how doing well. But so it's a challenge for me, because I have a speech about prepared talking points for the current situation in Ukraine, but let me make it in the different way. Because you can find the facts in the internet, in the different resources, but I want to remind you how it's began in our not a very old history, when we simply, especially for young generation, for students. I remember that 30 years ago, it was no iPhones, the smartphone, even mobile cell phone. It was no computers, and only access for America from Ukraine, it was phone conversation. How we did it at that time? You call operator, who is a KGB mayor, and ask him, please, I want connect with United States. Okay, please wait for 10 minutes. Why? Because make the special equipment to, to have the full understanding what you plan to do in the future. And now it seems like a completely strange situation. But in another access, by the way, it was another access. Maybe young people don't know about that. Maybe some of those who have knowledge about Helsinki Act can now have this memory. It was another access. It was for the part of free world, the user so-called radio station. And it was possible for a very small group of Ukrainians, mostly for young people in school. And I was in this Ukrainian team, and we can reach any country in the world for such a conversation, also controlled. But I remember when I contact in 1985 with Raúl Castro. It's a brother of the leader of, now leader, by the way, of Cuba, with King Hussein, with expedition for Arctic of one of the Soviet newspaper, Komsomolskaya Pravda, at that time. So we reach such place in the world for the long distance, not with mayor, but with a KGB guy, but directly. And I remember when we exchanged by the thumb rules, I find in the United States that in the Soviet time was, but no one can recognize some specificities of development of Ukraine. That exist Ukrainians, so it was Soviet people, and only one country in this part of the world, Soviet Union. Cold War, after that attempts to maintain peace, after that to make the new friendship, and so Ukraine was also involved in that. But but fighting for a long time for our independence from 90s, we have developed our country and also use our own way for the future, for security and foreign policy. So please allow me not 100% agree with this title, Ukraine and Crossroads. despite we are given, maybe embassy, my colleagues give this title. You know, it's a world on crossroads, not Ukraine. Ukraine simply on the front line of that, but for Ukraine, we are, frankly, now not on the crossroads, we are on the highway. Why? Because we make the final choice 3 years ago, when neighboring country, which for a long time was our very closest neighbor, for a long time to share with us the same historical events, in which we have many relatives and friends, and I myself also, this unpredictability without any announcement or declaration of war, the open aggression against Ukraine, Russia. And after that, this 3 years, we live in a different world in my country. Because before that, we have, and you can find in that time, some line that's divided the country. So some of the people support the idea to be closer to Russia and be with Russia in one union, so like restore Soviet Union. We still have some guys like Putin that think about such a stupid idea. Sorry for this one, but you know, and another part of our country believe in another way for Ukraine, historical role. I've been asked just now about history of Prince Volodymyr and very, you know, interesting heritage of our country that's begin in the ages. And after that, we have different periods of development, different historically different Ukraines. But finally, we have the Ukraine in this border that's we are after 90s, when we fight for our independence, sovereignty. And after the breaking of Soviet Union, we live for this 25 years. By the way, this year it's the 25th anniversary of our diplomatic relationship with the United States. We live in a different world. And we believe this sphere goes in this direction, closer to the European Union, Western countries, Western allies. Why European Union? Because very simple. If United States be next to us, closer to us, neighbor, maybe it will be United States. It would be United States, but the European Union in the European continent. So we now, and before and now, despite the different authorities in Ukraine, we make a closer steps to European Union regulation, and so to bring Ukraine back to European civilization, not only historically, geographically, culturally, but also politically and economically. Now we, next weeks, I believe it will be final stage of that. We are not final stage, but important stage. We signed agreement with the European Union. We will ratify it, Netherlands, Dutch will ratify this agreement, and we will go to the next stage of our integration, not cooperation or partnership. But another important thing that we plan to do, develop relationship also with Russia in the East, mostly trade relation, economy, so as a normal neighbors. But finally, 3 years ago, it was move that's facilitate all the processes in the country and in Europe. It was a decision by President Putin to use some weaknesses, temporary weaknesses of an instability in Ukraine, because 3 years ago, in 2014, Ukrainians defend on the streets, demonstration according to the Constitution of Ukraine. They are willing to be closer to West, not to Russia. And this peace demonstration was simply, initially it was students who have been beaten in the streets. And I want to remind you this situation. I remember that in October, 3rd October of 2013, when students demonstrated they're willing to be live in a new world, closer to their friends in the West, our police, in that time this was like a Soviet militia, they beat them. They, you know, and it was, after that, it was discussion in the evening, discussion in the kitchen, so-called, what we should to do. Finally, we find millions of Ukrainians who come next day in the main square in Kiev, so-called Maidan of Independence. That's why we have Maidan. We have, by the way, organization here, Ukrainians, Maidan, Minnesota. So Maidan, very known word now in the world. And after that, it's bringing us to some instability, internal instability. And finally, we find the solution. But Russia not satisfied with that. And now investigation continues, but it was dramatic developments. More than 100 young people been killed in 2014. And after that, immediately after that, even before that, Russia made the attempt of annexation of Crimea. So that's, I just want to demonstrate how is it connecting this thing. Internal developments in Ukraine and Russia, and this situation with our war with Russia, but at the same time some developments in European security. Why it's happened? Its main reason that Russia want to prevent us for choosing own way and decision to be closer to European nations. Because most of Russia in Eurasia, in Asia, so it's for understandable why Ukrainians won't be closer there. But second, it's attempt to keep Ukraine in the same situation that's Russia now. So building not the independent modern nation, but rebuild something like, not Soviet Union, but like empire. That's why many things that's happened in Russia now, it's like a replica of those that happened 100 years ago in Russia, before and after revolution. That's why we have a completely different perception in Ukraine and Russia about history, about Stalin dictatorship, about hundreds years of so-called, not orange, but Lenin revolution, October revolution. So they tried to keep us for own choice, but we defend that, and I'm proud of my nation because we lost 100 in 2014. Now, after 3 years of war, plus 10,000. Can you imagine? 10,000. Last 2 weeks, 5 killed and 13 wounded. But we paid a big price, but we understand and we know definitely for what we pay this price. We pay this price for our children, for the future of our children. We want to make our choice. We already deferred this choice. That's why we are not on crossroads. We are on the highway, and now only one direction. And that time it was possible 2 directions, to the west and closer to Russia, now only one direction. It's integration with the Western countries. So it's a final choice of our people. Why is final choice? I can imagine how we can change this after the 10,000 killed people. So this blood of these people, and you know, Russians approach not, they simply not about human being, life of human being. That's a completely different from our approach for the future. So we are stand here. We are standing in this situation that we make this choice. Russia still want to bring us back. We are going in the different direction, but the main problem that we still need to defend our country from the open aggression and possible full-scale war. That's why we find the other way how to resolve this conflict with Russia, not the open full-scale war, but open negotiation in the multilateral formats, and also include our friendly nation, like the United States, Great Britain, European Union countries, Australia, Japan. But it's happened, I remember that, because I was in that time, and can say now that I was one of the authors of this peace plan by President of Ukraine. Now it's named like President of Ukraine Peace Plan. But I remember when we in Berlin with my friend, now Minister of Foreign Affairs, Pavlo Klimkin, we are prepared that in the night by instruction by future President of Ukraine. And when we prepared this first 10 position, how to resolve the conflict and bring peace, we go with that to Normandy, and together with President of France, François Hollande, now former president, but we really appreciate his involvement and contribution in that, and Chancellor of Germany, Merkel. We combine our efforts to push leader of Russia, Putin, for right direction, and we introduced so-called Normandy format of negotiation. And after that, we had many meetings and phone calls of the different formats, and finally so-called Minsk arrangements. It's political documents that with the main goal to bring peace and stop fire. So ceasefire was most ambitious idea of these arrangements. And we also receive responsibility of Russia on the implementation of these arrangements. The main idea is stop fire, withdraw Russian troops and weapons from Ukrainian territory, close the border, taking control on the border, and release hostages from both sides. Unfortunately, still, it's not implemented yet. That's why, for us, crucial important position of the United States. Last week, together with Minister of Foreign Affairs, we met with President of the United States, Trump, and Vice President Pence, and many officials, White House, Pentagon, Department of State. So, three main messages that we receive from the American leadership. First, that United States stand with Ukraine. And important not make any big deal, many rumors about that, big deal with Russia on Ukraine. No big deals. And the main position remain the same. There's a sanction policy, the support of Ukraine by military technical assistance, also assistance for reforms, and deeper cooperation in the different levels. The second thing, very important, that they are reaffirmed strong position of a Russian responsibility of implementation of Minsk arrangements. That's also very important because I want to remind you that from very beginning, Russians even not recognize the presence of their troops on our territory. I remember, maybe you remember this press conference of President of Russia when being asked about the possible presence of Russian soldiers on the Ukrainian territory. He said, no, it's impossible, no. The second time being asked about that, he said, when we take them and send for their mothers letters, your sons here in Kiev, and make the press conference. And Putin said, okay, but they lose their way. Maybe they lose their way for 70 kilometers inside the country. So that's, you know, it sounds like joke, but it's not joke. If you lose your people, it's simply, it's not responsible partner. It is not trusted partner. And sometimes it's not a partner, it's somebody who is a lie. It is impossible on the level of the leadership in the country. Such a nuclear power, big country, Russia, and still very important for international relations. And we'll be not surprised, we'll be shocked. We'll be shocked because now everybody knows how many troops in our territory. Everybody knows how they've been instructed, how this process leaders by Russian officers, but they still do not recognize that. We apply an International Court of Justice, prepared this very well, this case, and finally they even recognize, they sent the special rocket launch system book to Ukrainian territory, and this system with Russian operators kill MH17 fly, Malaysian fly. You remember this terroristic attack. And now they recognize, okay, this is bring from Russian territory. Okay, we are bringing this back, but not with intention to kill the flight. So that's a sound stretch, but in international law, Russia stands on the position to everybody should be 100% implement international law, but not the Russia, not Russia. And that's the most problem, how to deal with them. But anyway, it could be another country, Ukraine, another. I think it was the first, our common mistake in Georgia in 2008. in that time was not a strong response for this attempt by Europeans mostly, and frankly by the United States. The United States, on the final stage, make very strong messages and even send ships in the Black Sea. That's right. Also, Ukrainian president and president of Poland, presidents of Baltic states come to Tbilisi and stand together, stand next to the president of Georgia. And I remember when Russian tanks was in the 25 kilometers from the Georgia capital, Tbilisi. And after that, it was a long process of, find a solution. And finally, everybody is satisfied with such a compromises. Russia was recognized, was a trusted partner, and everything, business as usual. And what's happened? This was next attempt of annexation of independent country, Peninsula Crimea, and aggression of Russia. So I think it's a huge mistake. So it's experience and lesson that we learn. If you're strong enough, if you demonstrate that the price of any attempt to break international order or to destroy peace, to make the price for those who try to change the development of the world. So in that case, you have peace. If not, you will have next attempts for war, to use war like an instrument, and that's an unacceptable approach in 21st century. I will answer your question after that, but three important things that I want to say now. The first, we live in a very small world. We're on the same boat. It seems like a very long distance, Ukraine from the US, or Middle East, or North Korea. But now, when we have not only missiles that have access for the different countries for 10, 15 minutes, but also have a so-called hybrid war, cyber attack, many other instruments, how to broken this peace, we understand and realize how we're close, how we should be united to find the response of new threats and challenges. The second important thing, the approach of pragmatism or approach of the real politics matters, but values important. The basic values, the human being, the importance of, some basic things for all families. Because when we face that with our relationship with Russia, we understand that something should happen with other nations, not only with us. Because if you live with one standards, but your neighbor live in other, it can lead for some problems in the future. That's why we need keep in strong position, but also try to find direction for those who elude their direction, as Putin mentioned. But there's more ambitious ambitious task to find the right direction for the nation of more than 100 million. And third, we need to be ready, not after the problem to find the response, but before that, to be ready enough to meet any threat or any challenge. And it couldn't be without effective or efficient institution. Unfortunately, existing institutions like United Nations, other organizations, not effective enough. United States sometimes replace them as a, so-called world policeman, but it's a different approach, a different administration, but we name it American leadership. I understand that you want to make this cheaper, but believe me, price of losing this leadership will be higher than if you are now pay money. I mean, American taxpayers. So we simply save your money for the future if you give additional assistance countries like Ukraine that stand firm for European and global security. That's why I believe some changes in approach, some rumors about approach of American new administration now obvious will not be dramatic changes in this approach, and this is good news for Europeans, for Ukraine. At the same time, we also understand this is not a final story. Next year, crucial important for the international order for the next decades. Not only because of Ukraine, but because of Middle East development, North Korea, and other regions. But what's important? When I met with American politicians and experts and those who analyze situation and security in Europe, I told them, you know, Northern Korea, Middle East important, but World War I, World War II began in Europe. So Europe matters. Europe important. Europe, I think, most important region, because development of the free world depend of the keeping good contacts, not only contacts, but to be still alliance with European Union country and the United States, and real understanding of strategy, security and foreign policy in this part of the world, in Europe. We are Ukrainians. Now, you know, the exercise some new thing in this 21st century. We are together with Americans in our train and equip programs with support of our National Guard and our military forces. We find the new instruments for this response. And what's more important, not keep Ukraine on crossroads, but on this highway and go further. Your support, we appreciate a lot this support. Believe me, Ukraine will contribute a lot in the future for not only for American security, but for American development, United States. Now we open new jobs in Ukraine for Boeing, Facebook, as a country that's on the third position in the world for IT and outsourcing. Now we have, last year we launched in a space our common project Antares. We have developed new project with the United States in high tech. We develop our agricultural, that's you said about our companies that come to Minnesota. So we want to trade, we want to invest, we want to make new contacts, people-to-people contacts. We do not want war. But we are ready. Defend our country, we are ready to defend security in Europe, we are ready with you together defend international order. So Ukraine, important country, please keep Ukraine in focus, and thank you very much that you are doing that, being together today.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Chali, for those interesting and very helpful remarks. Let me add to what Carol and Mary Curtin had to say. Welcome to Minnesota. Welcome to the University of Minnesota, my alma mater. I'm particularly proud to have you here. My wife and I came to this area 3 years ago when we had just about as much of Washington, D.C. as we could take. And we've found this to be a vibrant community that is deeply interested in the world around and deeply knowledgeable about foreign affairs and interested in learning more. We're honored that you took time out of your busy schedule and given all of Ukraine's many deep, if not acute, problems and challenges that it faces in the world and to some extent with the United States to come out here and meet with this group. The format we'll proceed with here is I will begin by asking a couple of questions to get the conversation started. We very much want to take your questions. There are note cards that are going around, and I will try then to kind of group those together a little bit, look for some of the common themes that people would like to see addressed, and then formulate a kind of a summary question that reflects those conclusions to Ambassador Chali. I'd like to start out, I thought it was very helpful that you went back to the beginning a little bit, back to Soviet times, back to the transition out of the Cold War and out of communism, the accomplishments that went along with that for your country and your people in being able to develop for yourselves a kind of a future that would have never existed and could never have existed in the Soviet Union. Throughout that period, and in the 1990s anyway, I had some responsibility for U.S. policy toward the former Soviet states, and it was kind of the central focus of our policy then was to support the sovereignty, the territorial integrity, and the independence of each and every one of the new states that emerged from the Soviet Union. We did that in part out of the recognition that for over 70 years, the principal threat to America's way of life had come from the Soviet Union, and it wasn't a bad thing that it no longer existed anymore, and we didn't want to see it created. But it was also America standing up for freedom and independence of peoples who wanted to forge their own future and to do it in an independent way. And I think Ukraine's got a boatload of problems. You referred to a number of those. Ukraine's accomplishments in building an effective new state and an effective new future for its peoples is important. And I want to turn from that really to ask you to elaborate a little bit about the domestic side, and not to get you too deeply into domestic politics, which I know from my own experience can be a risky topic for any ambassador overseas, but to talk about where the Ukrainian people are. Public opinion polling and research that I've seen suggests that Ukrainians very strongly support the idea of compromise to deal with the situation it now finds itself in vis-a-vis Russia. Deep divisions among the population about what kinds of compromises might be acceptable, either for Ukraine as a country or acceptable to the individuals being asked these questions. Could you talk a little bit about where the Ukrainian people are on relations with Russia, and in particular the degree of consensus that exists around the ideas that you've put forward, which very clearly reflect what have been the stated priorities of the government in Kyiv?
Thank you, Ambassador. Before that, I want to ask you, do you see any possible compromise for the United States with North Korea?
Difficult to see. Good question.
It's interesting where you find there's some discussion in Ukraine about compromise with Russia. It's a tricky game by Russia. That Ukrainians try to find a compromise. Come on, how to find compromise with a country that's killed you 10,000 people? Unfortunately, they make a great mistake, not a criminal case, but mistake, because Russia will remain our neighbors for a long time, so we will live with Russian people, but before that, they should do many important things, withdraw weapons, close the border, stop the kill the people. After that, it could be not compromise. It's not a compromise, but you are right. The final stage, if restore peace, mostly it's compromise in the history of the world, right? But not every time. I remember Ukraine be pushing a lot from the United States and Russia, not a compromise, but simply giving up our nuclear weapons. And you ask about Ukrainian perception. Ukrainians criticize us a lot. Why we're doing that? Why we did that? And my own opinion is it was the right decision in this nuclear arsenal. But Ukrainians now really disappointed because Budapest Memorandum, signed in 1996, it was United States, Great Britain, and Russia who gave us assurances of our security. And Russia broke this. Our partners alliance, United States and Great Britain, still help us, but Russia destroyed that. So that's a demonstrate for Ukrainian people, any documents signed with Russia can guarantee you security. So only two things can guarantee you security. It's being inside the system, security system, like NATO, or have a strong capabilities and army. So it's not a time for finding a compromise. I think it's a rather time to bring Russia for responsibility for that activity they are doing, still doing. Speaking about discussion in Ukraine and perception, I have different, maybe you're right about the polls, but 3 years ago. Now we have the last week I received from IRI and NDI for two institutions of Democrats and Republicans, two fresh pools, that demonstrated very significant changes. Ukrainian people, as never before, keep the common position. I give you example. 3 years ago, it was 16% of Ukrainian 1/6 who support Euro-Atlantic integration or membership in NATO. Now we have more than 60%, according to all the polls. Yes, it's not Crimea. It's Soviet Navy veterans, not for membership in NATO. But most of the country were united about that. European Union, membership in the EU, more than 50%. You see more complicated for Ukrainians, European Union than NATO. Identity. I also, the long-term lead think tank in Ukraine, and we made a project of identity of Ukrainians. It's important because part of Ukraine in that time, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, in Crimea, they said we have a very mixed picture. Partly 25% Soviet identity, not even Russia. 25% Russian identity, and the rest Ukrainian identity. In Donetsk, I mean the eastern part of Ukraine, it's an even more interesting picture. In all the region, mostly Ukrainian identity, but in the city of Lugansk in Donetsk, local identity. So for them, doesn't matter who is, who's paid the salary for them, Russia or Ukraine, or both. It's even much better. It's a perception of the people who is, frankly, we have picture, you can find there's something else in the world. Maybe I don't know, not experiencing that. If the guy keep the machine gun and say, why they not pay me pension? I'm a veteran of the Soviet army. Why Kiev not pay me pension? He killed Ukrainians and won't receive from the government pension. So, and our partners push us doing that. We still supply some energy resources to this region because we recognize these people are our Ukrainians, still Ukrainian citizens. And it's very difficult now to find compromise. So first things we and Russia must do, withdraw troops, weapons. Can you imagine 700 tanks? How it's happened? 700 tanks. Putin said, okay, no problem. You can buy this times tank in a shop, in a supermarket. It's not a joke. It's like it sounds like that. After that, they changed. These tanks was found in the miners. And when we find their sophisticated weapons like Buratino, it's a new system. This Russia test last years. So stop fire, withdraw weapons, closing border, release our hostages. We still have many in prisons in Russia, and we are ready for this exchange, but unfortunately they don't want. And after that, it will be, I believe, they bring Russia to play by rules, on rules, but not by rules, you know. And after that, restore international order, this responsibility. And if Russian leadership recognize this responsibility, we will go further. But you're right from that point of view. That's some ideas of compromise you can find in American newspaper. Believe me, they pay a lot of money for lobbyists, I mean Russians, and some Ukrainian politicians. They would change a regime in Ukraine and like revenge, like come back. And they pay a lot of money for such an idea. It's time to find a compromise with Russia without any change of Russian approach. I can accept that. And believe me, I can speak very frankly on that because I am a diplomat, but I spent a lot of time standing with my people on Maidan and during Orange Revolution, during the Revolution of Dignity. And I remember what they did, and I know what we should do now. And I spent a lot of time dealing with Russians as a secretary of strategic group, Russian-Ukraine strategic group, and I know Russian approach. If you make a compromise, they go further. If you keep equal position with them, they recognize you. That's it's my piece of advice for new administration how doing with Russia, because we're, you know.
Let me ask you to build off of that and talk a little bit about the Normandy-Minsk process for this group, a little sense of kind of how that works, and what you see as the dynamics there that should or could ultimately lead to a Russian decision to change course with respect to Donbass and Crimea, and ultimately to withdraw.
You know, the question this, our team, I mean, international and foreign policy Ukrainian team asked for a long time, for these 3 years. With Minsk arrangements, frankly, it's not the best arrangement that's in the world for the last century or in the beginning of this century, but it's only mechanism that we have, how to, you know, to bring Russia for responsibility. And unfortunately, other institutions, other mechanism doesn't work. With the implementation of this Minsk arrangement, it's a big problem, because, huge problem. Because if one of side of this process not ready to implement, they can find any excuses for not doing that. At the same time, the idea from Russia with Minsk arrangements was to make the picture that Ukraine must negotiate with proxies, so-called Donetsk Republic, Lugansk Republic, without Russia, and Russia out of game. Finally, this Minsk arrangement demonstrates for Cold War of how to resolve conflict of Ukraine and Russia with support of international community, firstly Germany and France, and United States as a parallel track doing with Russia on the Minsk arrangements. Where we stand now, it's a long time, unfortunately not significant changes, but what's happened, give me more optimism. It's more activity of OSCE, SMM, Special Monitoring Mission, because it's very important to receive the information what's happened in this temporary occupied territory, not controlled temporarily by Ukrainian government. Unfortunately, even Americans pay a big price. You know, this case, this American monitor from OSCE mission died in this territory, not controlled by Ukraine, and day before yesterday, it was in Arizona, it was a ceremony, and Ukrainian government appreciate for family for that big pride they pay for peace in my country. So we still discuss security of this mission with Russia and try to bring them for this responsibility. They push proxies for the right direction and to allow them access to the border. Now important this access to the border as a first stage, how restore control on the border. After that, Ukraine can to restore border, but before that, OSCE mission. So that's an important task. Another task today, we have negotiation in Minsk. Just received a message with our leader in this negotiation was Speaker of the Parliament, Irina Gerashchenko. She's in her birthday, by the way, he's very tough and to find a solution for hostages and release hostages. And so if we speak about some results, it's mostly about hostages. We have some release of hostages from both sides, but the rest of this, unfortunately, not achieved. Because we need like a roadmap, understand how to move ahead, and every time we're in this process. Normandy format, Minsk group, everything we are in the process. But it's bad news, no significant result, but it's also good news, no full-scale war. So where we are now. Minsk arrangements, I remember I was one of the member of this group, leading by President of Ukraine. It was 60% of Ukrainians who supported these arrangements from very beginning. because in that time Russia opened, to this invasion was with tanks, with everything. So people simply want to find any solution for that. Now only 8% of Ukrainians support Minsk arrangements, but most of Ukrainians ask why we stand where we are. So we are ready to pull them out. But I think it's also not a solution, because we have to use diplomatic way. We still keep this position to find a diplomatic way to resolve this conflict with Russia. And we believe we will successfully finalize that. Crucial year this and next year. Next year will be election in Russia, and Putin changed date of this election for the date of the so-called fake referendum in Crimea. So I think it's crucial, important developments next year and preparation this year. Minsk arrangement bad, but we do not have anything else for the negotiation with Russia for that time. If we need more involvement of the United States. The best, some Ukrainian politicians propose Budapest format, United States, Great Britain, Russia, Ukraine. Some propose format when we met, I remember we met in Wales and in Milano, we met in the G5 with participation of Ukrainian president. So it could be different formats, but more important, not the formats, but readiness of Russia to go for real steps. And now we are still keep pressure to achieve this possible final negotiation. And I believe that without United States involvement in the final stage, it is impossible to achieve sustainable peace. Because, okay, in the case we even withdraw weapons, but if these troops remain in 10 kilometers from our border, this will be not sustainable peace. So U.S. position crucial, important, and messages from the White House now more optimistic than even 4 months before.
Let me follow up with one of the specific questions that came from the audience. It's a two-part question. The first I think you've kind of answered, but maybe you'll elaborate. Will Ukraine try to retake Crimea, and if so, how? Also, why does Russia feel so entitled to Crimea, especially in light of the status that had been given to the city of Sebastopol?
3 questions. With Crimea, before that I have to give you one story from history of Crimea that I received from first president of Ukraine, Kravchuk, 3 months ago. Crimea in 1953-54 was very region with a depression development. And people simply can't develop agriculture because Stalin, after World War II, pushed out Crimea Tatars, all of them from Crimea Peninsula, and they lose this knowledge how to, doing with agriculture in such a specific region, with supplying water even from the outside peninsula, needing irrigation system, everything. So finally they ask people of Crimea, ask Soviet leadership, doing something with that. And Soviet leadership, as usual, instructed Ukrainian authorities in the time, Ukrainian Republic, took this responsibility for Crimea. Ukrainians, believe me, didn't want to take Crimea because have many things to do on the big republic in that time, Soviet Union. But President Kravchuk said, Khrushchev, who came to Crimea, said, no chance, you will take it. And from that time, in the Soviet time, they spent more than $100 billion equivalent for Crimean infrastructure. So I just want to demonstrate you, even take Sevastopol like military base, it's very difficult to develop economically Crimea as whole. They still depend on Ukrainian water, fresh water. They still depend from Ukrainian supply of electricity. And this bridge that's Russia built from Russian territory to peninsula, I remember these attempts in 19th. In that time, they considered the price of building this bridge for $500 million. Now they said 3 billion, but because of corruption in Russia, we also a corrupted country, but less than Russia. They now think this they will spend 7 billion. Can you imagine if they spend 7 billion for bridge, what's happened with the economy of Crimea in the future? If they need to build this infrastructure. But I think that's have another goal. And we discuss even here in Minnesota with some our Crimea Tatars who come to Minnesota. By the way, thank you very much that you are giving them a chance for study here in Minnesota because they are prohibit access to Crimea now. So Russians plan to build military base. You know, such a big military base, and they do not need 2.5 million people there. They need less people, and not only Sevastopol, but all peninsula like a military base. So they now have carrier of nuclear weapons there, and it's very easy to bring warheads or nuclear, not warheads, but missiles for these carriers. It's 15 hours. And be prepared for this attack. That's why we're concerned not only about, definitely about people, but also about the next development of Black Sea region. It's also important. Can we bring back Crimea? Absolutely. How long time it was, I don't know. Because we go through the long we take, you know, it's a hard way, but right way, I think. Apply to international courts, United Nations. We'll see what's better in this. Not we, but maybe analysts and experts. What's better? Not defend peninsula like we did and try to find solution, or defend country like in Donbass. I think Donbass will be back in Ukraine in the very short period, but Crimea is depend of the development in Russia, in Ukraine, and in Crimea. Because if people live in Russian propaganda for 2, 3, 5 years, it can change dramatically their perceptions. Russians now want to replace Crimea Tatars, Ukrainians by people from the Caucasus, Dagestan, Ingushetia, from Tatarstan. So they open programs how to replace people. And this approach, you know, very challengeable for the future. But in any case, according to international law, Crimea remains Ukrainian territory. In fact, we do not control this territory, this reality. But in the future, it depends on developments also in Donbass. And also what will international court will decide about that. Because next for this decision will be responsibility. Ambassador knows this responsibility just not words. It's also some measures. And United States not use all the instruments, and European Union not use all the instruments. So we'll see. But in any case, we still recognize Crimea Tatars, Ukrainians, Russians who live in Crimea as part of our communities, our society. And one of the new initiatives by President of Ukraine to give Crimea autonomy and change constitution. And give this autonomy. Maybe it was a mistake because we think that, frankly, it was even state, state position bring more Russians to Crimean Peninsula because avoid some threats of the Wahhabism, Islam, such type of Islam in the peninsula. But finally we understand this was Russian who killed us from the back. And that's a huge mistake that we did. That's why we want now to give more opportunities for Crimean Tatars. Crimean Tatars, Parliament of Crimean Tatars Medjlis, instructed all Crimean Tatars back closer to peninsula because when they are, tens of thousands of them was pushed out from the peninsula, they goes, not, by the way, not in Europe, but in Ukraine, in the western part, Lviv, Ternopil, this western part of Ukraine. But now they've been instructed to come back closer to peninsula administrative border. And they already fight for their future, because only place to live for them, Crimea Peninsula. So, frankly, if they decide for some action, it will be very difficult for us to prevent that. And that's why it is not only about Ukraine, it is about people, Crimea Tatars, who definitely restore the order and together with us, and makes these people from Stalin period first time push out from the peninsula, now Putin second time, to find their families in the peace in their native land.
There are a number of questions that have been posed about Ukraine's discussions with the European Union. If you could give us a little bit more of a sense of a detail of what it is, or the commitments that Ukraine has taken upon itself as part of the agreements that now have been worked out with Brussels, the visa regime and the trade in the area of trade. A couple of questions deal in this the context of relationship with the European Union with underlying political and economic reforms in Ukraine, dealing more effectively with matters of corruption, obviously a problem in Ukraine as in other former Soviet states, with minority rights in the country, and also one here that focuses on agriculture, the European Union's very regulatory approach to agriculture and its regulatory approach to agricultural trade, how Ukraine, what kind of a deal Ukraine was able to carve out for itself in that area. Basket of things.
You know, for ambassador in the United States, this equation. I just share with you very new development and news. Association agreement. It's not now we implement the association agreement, but I believe when we will finalize this ratification in Netherlands, we will have new regulation and will be closer to European market. So it's very ambitious the goal for Ukraine, because these standards, European standards, costs, and sometimes you can even pay price. But in the future, this will allow us to develop economy more dynamic than we have today. Now we have this year probably 2% of growth of GDP, but for such countries as Ukraine, we need 6+% of growth of GDP per year, because in other case we are not be successful like our neighbors as Poland, that's developed with support of European Union, more dynamic than Ukraine. The second important thing, and very symbolic, this visa-free access to European Union for Ukrainians. It's not only visa-free regime, but also new opportunities to be closer with our Western neighbors. And, for example, low cost immediately to open new lines from Ukrainian cities to cheaper. So we will be closer to Europe, and this allows also to develop business links and business projects. But, you know, we're still not a part of European security system. You know, Ambassador, this European security system is a very discussable issue, but what we know, that's NATO, with American leadership now responsible and contribute a lot for European security. And I believe Ukraine one day also will be a member NATO, I don't know, other structure that's a collective security system, because without that, without the combining our efforts, it is impossible to secure Europe. Perception of the people changed dramatically. and this is a chance to beg for Eurovision song contest. You know, can you imagine if all the European nations come to Kiev and being told this country will involve with Russia in state of war, and so brave people come to capital of Kiev and find the beautiful country, find the diversity and tolerant people with hospitality, and finally we have, after this Eurovision, we have now many not only Ukrainians but also Europeans who advocate for Ukraine in Europe. And I believe it's changed also dramatically the situation very next time. But it's easy to do it, be closer in that way, but economically it's a different thing. We a long time depend of Russian economy. I mean, we receive, you know, more than 70% of our gas supplies from Russia, up to 100% of for nuclear fuel. We had the, not remember, but it was, I think, 40% of our trade with Russia. Now we have 8% with Russia, still have some, but most with Europe and third markets. We receive 2 years ago, even 2 years ago, we received this big amount of gas from Russia. Russians consider gas like, these supplies through Ukraine and for Ukraine like an instrument, or even sometimes some experts said like an energy weapon. Do you know how many we receive now, which amount we receive now? When Russian told us, we prohibit you, they make these tricks, everybody stop supply, you will not survive, in the winter you will be frozen. Now we receive 0. And Russian asks, please, take our gas. No, thanks. No, no, we don't want. But frankly, they supply in Europe, and we take some from Europe. It's also true. But you know, it's a market. It is market, and it's cheaper for us, and okay, it's a Russian approach to ban Ukrainian trade with Russia, but it's challenge. It's challenge because we lose 20% of our GDP in Donbass, because it mostly was steel production plants, it was chemical production plants. It's a very damaging for economy, and restoration of that takes a long time. But it's good news, because without that, you can change the structure of your economy. We are heavily dependent of this structure. From the Soviet time, by the way, remained for us. So with economy, it's much difficult. That's why we need not only new regulations or closer relationship with Europe, but also create conditions in the country for attract investment, direct investment. We discussed this today in Minneapolis, we discussed this in the United States, but also discussed with Europeans. I believe this year, next year, we will have new projects for 200+ million from Europe and from the United States, and it's only way how to push the process of economic development in the country. And finally, for the future. Now, even more important, not the final stage, but the process and direction. And we go with the right direction, and it's only way how to modernize country, because we need new technology, we need new regulations, and the best way how to change the situation with corruption. You can find any other country, any country in the world without corruption. United States I've not mentioned, I'm ambassador here. But you know, the level of this corruption in my country, in former Soviet countries, is very high. That's a problem. What we did, we changed institution. We create anti-corruption bureau. We made many things in this build a new institution, and final stage will be this summer, I believe, or fall of this year. It's a special anti-corruption court. because court important part of this process. But law enforcement system, prosecution important, but more important, change the culture, perception of the people. That's much difficult because it goes from the Soviet time. And this style, how to change it? More American business in Ukraine, more European businesses in Ukraine, and these businesses can change the culture of how doing business in the country. And another important thing, to give up more, you know, like license regulations from the state to the market. And that's why privatization important, and President announced and Prime Minister next step of privatization. We want to, you know, finally introduce this land market reform. So many things to do, but significant changes. I can give you one example. Many of you heard about it, maybe not. For example, if you ask me about my salary, please do not ask me. Take your iPhone and you find my month's salary, every month's salary here. It's very easy. For all my information about myself, and all Ukrainian officials doing the same thing. All Ukrainian officials, but not monthly. It's also only diplomats, but the rest of bureaucrats once per year. It's open information, and it's revolutionary changes in Ukraine. It was very difficult, even, you know, to take this like important part, because we can imagine how in the case of Ukraine, who is in not in state of war, but in fact have a war with Russia, and open everything. So that's why it's a very difficult decision, and frankly, many Ukrainian politicians not be very happy with that. But finally, now we have a strong civil society, and journalists investigate about everybody. Now in this system, we have more than, if I'm not mistaken, millions of, but I'm surprised how many bureaucrats we have, but we have millions of this piece of information. So we began this fight against corruption, but example of Romania or Bulgaria, neighboring countries, show this takes not a short time, it takes a long time, and with support of France, it goes easy. So we have experts from the United States in our different law enforcement agencies, and also in General Prosecutor Office. We made this nomination for the Anti-Corruption Bureau with support of international experts, so independent commission. So we're doing many things, and I believe this year, it's the first year that we received the first very significant result, not only in courts as a prosecution, but also at the level of corruption. By the way, now we, in some indexes, we're going up on 20, 30 position in this year, institutionally, and I mean there's transparency of doing business, like a new system of new public procurement system, Prozoro, so-called Prozoro. By the way, we want to propose United States to take Ukrainian experience, and maybe Minnesota will be the first state who has introduced this public procurement system, Prozoro Ukrainian, in your regulation here in Minneapolis. I've not proposed it for the office, but now made it with your participation.
Just to follow on that, could you speak a little bit to what's the Ukrainian government's view on the prospects for ultimately at some point in the future joining the European Union? What might be some of the risks, what might be some of the issues that would be important from Ukraine's point of view as part of that kind of a conversation? And the related subject, or not entirely unrelated subject, Brexit. Has that had any impact on the discussions that your government's having with Brussels?
Brexit, not only Brexit, but the growth of Euroscepticism in Europe was not the best help for us in the situation that we go further closer to European Union and integration. And so Ukrainians now, I think, the most optimistic European nation in the world. And stand, yeah, it's reality, because we stand with European flags under the bullets and be ready to defend that with our lives. And that's why we are sometimes, you know, don't understand what is such a long time achievement in Europe, broken into very such a style. But we understand this, maybe it's a period that we're going to pass through. Every nation decide about their future and the best instruments, but Brexit is understandable. I'm also one of education historian, so I understand why Great Britain can choose another way, but not for Ukraine. We are traditionally, historically belong to this group of the countries. We was with them in the same states in the previous time, or part of our territory. That's why every news for more integration in Europe, good news for us. Brexit and other news like temporarily less dynamic of integration in Europe is not good news for us. But membership in the EU we not consider now like realistic timely goal for next, I don't know, 10 years. We'll be happy, but we understand that we should do many things, homework. More realistically thinking about future membership in the security, collective security system than in the economic system of European Union. I can say even more, I'm not sure that we will have the same European Union in the future, in the 10 or 15 years. But what's important, in any case, European Union, like a family of the nation, united by not only economic interests, but also common values and the common approach and the big market, 500 million plus market is important for everybody. Achieve in a very difficult discussion the common currency, euro. It's a significant change. So to lose that is the wrong way. And I think the result of election in France and next result of election in Germany will demonstrate that it was a very short time of Euroscepticism in Europe.
We have time for one last set of questions. There are a number that have come from the audience asking about Ukraine's relations with the United States. You've already spoken some about this, but if you could elaborate a little bit on what it is that Ukraine is asking of the United States government now, what you're expecting, to what extent, if you want to go beyond what you've already said, is Ukraine confident in what you're hearing from the authorities in Washington and the United States' ability, willingness to deliver? And then sort of as a sidebar of that, the assistance that the United States has provided to Ukraine has been quite substantial. The leaked information about the details of the Trump budget request includes, I think, a 68% cut in American assistance to Ukraine. If you could talk a little bit about how where that issue may stand in your discussions with Washington.
Let's begin with this that you just asked. I think we did a good job in embassy when immediately after the publication in, if I'm not mistaken, in Foreign Affairs, we check documents and my colleagues also to ask the partners about it. And finally, we find this situation not so bad when we predict. And now, after the Congress, we have bipartisan support. This year, we have even 25 million plus than we had last year, if we not calculate loan guarantee money. We received last year 1 billion loan guarantee. We appreciate for that. But for this loan guarantee, not we, you need in the budget 275 million. So now we do not have this money, but we have 560 million by decision of the Congress. They adopted that, appropriated that. So we have 150 million for military technical cooperation, and the rest money for the reforms, for the different reforms in Ukraine. So we are satisfied for this year. It is not the cut for 39%, despite the approach of new administration for the cut in these expenditures abroad. So Ukraine will remain important country for United States, and we appreciate that. And I think it's the right decision, because if you live on the half-way reforms, it's not good, because you spend the money, so you should finalize that. And what's important, when of this money goes to the pockets of Americans, not Ukrainians, because it is, for example, military technical support, assistance. It is not money, by the way. It's not any chance of corrupted anybody, because it's equipment. What we receive? We received last year counter-battery radars that simply save lives of soldiers. We receive communication. We receive vehicles and drones. So many things that's produced by American companies, and they receive this money. We receive this assistance. So now is pretty good, but what's happened next year is important. Now we work with Pentagon, State Department, Congress to keep this assistance on the level that allow us go further with this cooperation. Because, you know, frankly, $500 million of US dollars is not the amount of money that's helped Ukraine a lot. Maybe I can say about it, but for us, more important, this message. That's the United States with Ukraine. This level of assistance not goes down. Let's keep this level of assistance. Because we spend now 5.5% of our GDP for security and defense. It's billions of US dollars. So $500 million not help us 100%, but so now we are pretty optimistic for this year. For next year, we will try to make happen. This is development like that, and we receive for the beginning of equation. We last week in the White House, in National Security Council, Pentagon, Department of State, we received very clear message about priorities and about importance of Ukraine and support Ukraine. We are very satisfied with that, because you know, it was some rumors about not about only about deals, but about the change approach by White House abroad. So it's happened, but not at such level as we are all waiting for. So when we find 39%, in reality, some changes. Congress makes some changes. So finally, we receive some modification. And Ukraine also part of that, but not the significant changes. And we appreciate this. United States keep this support at this level.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, it's in years of dealing with Ukraine, I'd never had the opportunity to make your acquaintance. It's easy to see from your performance here tonight why you've gotten this very prestigious assignment as Ukraine's ambassador to the United States. You're doing a terrific job. Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments here, and to all of you.
Thank you very much.